Hey, this is Dave Bernabo, and this is the first audio interview for the Roaming column published by Petrichor, Pittsburgh. Today we are talking with artist Sidney Mullis.
Hi, my name is Sidney Mullis. I'm an artist living in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
All right, let's start. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about some of the earliest memories of art, like when you actually recognize something as art.
My grandmother on my mom's side was a seamstress. My mom is German, so my grandparents on that side, German as well. You know, they both passed away when I was younger, and, you know, I was an American-speaking child. So I spent a lot of time watching her. She had this sewing room, and, you know, she was making a whole bunch of different things and had made all of my mom's clothes growing up, even her wedding dress. It was a big deal when my mom got store-bought jeans and, like, had to sneak them into the house. This is from her telling me this. And so I don't think I had this conception of, like, art, capital A, but I saw a maker, and I saw someone who was able to have a sense of creative freedom through that process. And again, it wasn't through language, it was through watching her make these things and have fittings and, you know, go to the fabric store and, you know, have this old sewing machine, and she always had tennis playing. And so I think that was my understanding of it from a young age of, like, here's this person. She also didn't drive, so everyone came to her. So again, it was like this person setting up these systems around themselves to have this life that she, you know, wanted, and, you know, was able to have creative and financial freedom from that. And we still have, you know, clothes that she made, and with us living in the States, she would, you know, send over things that she made specifically for me as a child, and really weird things like these, like, fur-lined capes and, like, these shirts that were made out of, like, handkerchiefs, just very odd, like, you know, not these American styles, things that she very much made. So that would, I think, be my answer. Not art with a capital A, but this person who I had limited conversation with and communication with, but who clearly had a practice that helped her live a full life.
That's great. Did you grow up drawing as a child, or when did you get into art?
I grew up in a military family, so we moved all the time from Belgium to Germany to Alabama to Tennessee to Virginia, and then I kept moving as an adult. So I've been, like, very transient. So, you know, you having, you know, this, like, place-based history, I'm like, whoa, like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what that means. I don't know what that feels like either. So with moving all the time, my parents did want me to have some feeling of consistency, and that was dance classes. So there's always, like, a dance studio, it seems like, with whatever town you move to. And so my first art experiences were through dance and, like, very tangled up with my body, which, you know, led to a sensitivity toward bodies in space and performativity and kind of the hierarchy around that. You know, I clearly didn't know that as a kid, but as I got older, I was like, oh my gosh, I, like, performed all of these roles throughout my life and had a very narrow understanding of, you know, how bodies should move in space, whether it be on the stage and then outside of that, because I was, you know, always in it, always the new kid, always, forever and ever. So you see, or at least I saw, I should say, similar performances played out again and again and again, going from school to school to school and being, like, very much the wallflower and being like, I'm leaving in 3 years. So
Is that tiring?
Yes. I think I'm feeling it today. Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. And then when did you begin making things?
When I was in high school, it was like, oh, do I go off and, like, go to a dance school, right? I wasn't good enough. I think, you know, there was this, like, flirtation with that idea, but I didn't have it to be able to do that in a successful way. But I had this, like, extremely intact memory from, I don't have it anymore. I forget things all the time. I had this very extreme intact memory from my dance teachers, like relaying a whole sequence of movements, and we would just do it. They would just say it and we could do it. So when I started thinking about college, I thought I was going to do art history because I could remember all the things, all the facts, all the relationships, where that painting came from, where that dance came from, who performed those roles, onward. So I entered college having that kind of declared major. But then I took my first sculpture class my freshman year, and it just blew the doors wide open because it's all about space and it's all about how bodies move through space. And I had just spent my whole young life being a body moving in space, whether it be transient with my family as a military family moving from place to place, or in dance class, right? So I had really wonderful, responsible teachers who, you know, introduced me to art in that way that I was like, oh. And so, you know, I think I was like gnawing on some things I was curious about and pretty confused about and unhappy with. And so when they gave me that place to make from, I was like, oh, now I get to like totally address head on different things that I was disgruntled with, meaning like, why did I have to wear that costume? Why did I have to perform that particular role? Why is it always this particular body in the center of the space and not another? And I didn't have language for it at the time, but it was like, yeah. So it gave me the space to start doing that. So that's really when I started making things.
So you kind of jumped right into sculpture.
Yeah. So it wasn't like drawing. It wasn't, it was like sculpture. And I had this really wonderful professor who was like this example of a woman I had never seen before, who could like build anything, and just, I was like, whoa. Yeah. So very cool.
That's great. It seems like some of those themes play into a lot of the work that precedes the make-believe forest kind of work.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that seems like kind of a mix of sculpture, but also there's video too, right? And kind of installation.
Yeah. So it's really ranged. In school, I pretty naturally went toward performance, right? Probably not surprising. And then that turned into performative videos. And then these videos that were of my body, but you couldn't really tell it was my body, or maybe you could. And then I started taking the things that I was wearing in those videos and putting them out into space. The questions immediately became like, how does a body move around this? And how do I start building that choreography according to how I'm placing objects in space? And that's kind of where I am now, making these immersive make-believe forests that are all about how is that body engaging with what's in front of them? How are they understanding it, deciding how to move through it, understanding and placing their understanding of, you know, its systems and building it for themselves? Are they kneeling down? How close? Are they staying for a second, for a long time? And it brings like a lot of joy for me, because I think I've hit this place where it's doing exactly that. So when I'm installing, and then, you know, when I'm at openings and things like that, you know, seeing that kid like rush toward it and immediately get on their knees and like, you know, be this close away from it. Or, you know, another artist, you know, zooming in on a certain material, or, you know, the more general audience member, so to speak, having a really hard time not knowing what anything is, because the materials are often pretty elusive, right? And having a conversation out of that. So to me, when I get to have like all three of those experiences plus more, I'm like, that's exactly what I wanted, you know, being able to make these imaginative spaces where all those experiences can exist. And through those questions, you get to rebuild what it is and how it operates in a way that I hope people can take back into their lives, right? There's a lot of radical power in having a really free-form imagination.
So you have had iterations of basically this work for different sites, different audiences. Can you talk a little bit about the creation of a space? Like, what's the thought process? Do you map things out? Do you improvise?
Yes. So I'm making a lot of the objects in a studio, being really compelled by the materials, right? What they can be, and then they start superseding that, past their labels, past their marketed names in a way that I get really excited about, right? Because now they're performing outside of how they've been manufactured or marketed. And then once I'm on site, that's when the forest comes together. So there is a little bit of pressure, right? Because it's like, I don't know how this is going to go. And, I have to be mindful of like, how much time can I take off work? And, how much time does the space have for me to like figure it out? But two, I also talk to the curators or even just the people who are familiar with that space of like, how are people moving through it? Where do you feel them pausing? What corners do they avoid? And those conversations are really fun because they're the people who know the space the most. And I get to start playing within that. So there's always conversations back and forth with, either the people who invited me or the curators of the space. And then, I'm literally figuring it out. Some may say on the spot, but, I do need a little bit of time, and there's quite a bit of play back and forth of, where things are. I will say I do have, certain ideas going in, knowing like, okay, there's a weird heater here, or like that floor really doesn't match what I'm bringing there, right? So I may, cover up the floor a bit or not, or think about changing the lighting. So kind of all of that together. It's on the spot, but I'm paying attention to its architecture, understanding how people have moved in the space in the past, also knowing that there is a conceptual foundation of what I'm bringing there too, aka the make-believe forest. So those four things all together.
Cool. And I guess yes, some of the stuff you're bringing in would be taller than other things, so I'd imagine. So there's some like hierarchy of like what's most noticeable immediately if someone walks in a room.
Totally. Yeah, and like, do I want to touch the ceiling? Paying attention to that. How far am I splaying out? Am I going the whole width of the 55-foot room, or am I, making islands of the work? So.
And can you talk a little bit about some of I saw there's like a homemade paper pulp. Mm-hmm. Like, what are some of the materials you're using?
Yeah, so that homemade paper pulp is kids' construction paper and gravestone dust that I collected from a gravestone carver that I befriended when I used to live in State College, Pennsylvania. And I collected so much that I've never run out since I initially collected it from him. And then there's like some other materials in it that just make the paper pulp function as it should. It's not that exciting, but I also don't want to say. But those are the two main ingredients. The kids' construction paper, because I'm, using that oftentimes with young people in art classes. And then this gravestone dust was a material that I totally came to by accident, which I can share that story if you'd like.
Sure.
I had a whole bunch of these big rocks that I dug up from a friend's backyard, and I wanted to use them as bases for these really top-heavy sculptures. They had these like mosaic tops to them. They're really heavy, and they had just a dowel coming down from them, and I needed to figure out what I was going to put this dowel into. So literally building these sculptures upside down, right? You should probably start with the base, but I did not. And so I had all these rocks, and I had started drilling into them, and I needed an easier way to drill into them. And so someone had recommended a gravestone carver. There is a gravestone carver in State College, Pennsylvania. The business started, so it claims, in the 1880s, really, really, really long time ago. I did not make an appointment. I just kind of like had all these rocks in my arms and like entered the space, and immediately felt pretty inappropriate because there was an appointment going on where like this grieving people were like actively designing a gravestone with someone who was working in that space. But, the man working there like turned around and was very bright. I said like, "Oh, hi, I'll be with you in a second," and like didn't skip a beat, like didn't look at all these rocks in my arms or anything. And they were big and heavy and whatever. And I made my request, like, "Can you like drill 1-inch holes 2 inches deep in these 3 rocks?" And he was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll try." And he was like, "Come back at 5." And I was like, "Okay." When I came back at 5, he told me he had smashed all of my rocks under the weight of his equipment, right? That's okay. No big deal. I can go dig up some more rocks. But he started talking to me then and asking more questions. And it was just kind of amazing, an extremely memorable day. He ended up giving me this whole tour of his facility. He was very much a maker in my mind, and everyone there was also a maker, spending their days making these like very beloved, intentional objects for people who had passed. And in addition to being these carvers, a lot of them had these other jobs where they were carving other things. So this other person had also had a job carving teeth.
Oh.
So I was just blown away. And then we started talking about their gravestone dust and their dust collection system. And there was this huge vat of just dust from, hours and hours and hours and months of work. And he said, we use that as fertilizer on our lawns because it acts like lime. And so I'm thinking about like, it's the literal like dates and names carved out of these stones that is very meaningful and very charged. But it's then considered like the detritus of this process, right? It's just being, cast off wherever they move their trash to, I don't know. But then it's also being rejuvenated into this fertilizer, like literal like dust to dust connotation, right? And then he told me I could cast with it. And I was like, okay, hold on. Now you're talking about like sculpture and what? And I don't know, just I went in so unassuming, and he just, again, like so bright despite talking about what I imagined to be really hard subjects every day, talking about death every day, and just like so open and like, come on, like come see all this, and meeting all these other people who were also sculptors. And then at the end, talking about this dust collection system and this dust, and is it dust or is it the name of a loved one? And then he said I could take as much as I wanted.
Oh.
And so I was like, I'm like totally bombarded with just the weight of this whole day and their generosity and the dust and what it means. And I went and bought a whole bunch of buckets, lidded buckets, and I came back and just shoveled as much of this dust into these buckets as I could, took it back to studio, and when you mix it with water, it becomes like a paste, and started using it as like a literal glue in the paper pulp. So if you're thinking about, childhood selves and growing up, and you realize that all this paper pulp in this space is literally bound together by the gravestone dust, it becomes like extremely charged. And so I also use it as a binder in other things outside of the paper pulp too. And, when making work about time and aging and what is time and is it linear and how does it work and how does it make me understand how I age and other people age, the gravestone dust just like hits that so hard for me, and it was a total accident.
Yeah, that's wild.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One thing I was thinking when I was reading through some of the summaries of your work, I think I was always really frustrated as a creative child because there was no public output for the work. And so when I got older, I still felt creative and didn't feel limited because I could now show people it in maybe a formal way. So whenever I hear about like childhood creativity, I think I'm slightly biased towards not glorifying it as much.
Whoa.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah. So like you felt frustrated as a kid because you didn't have more formal outlets for it.
Yeah, like I record a record, but I don't have a way to manufacture this or do cover art or get it on radio stations because I'm like 12.
Yeah. Interesting. So was there a flip once you became an adult?
Yeah, joined a band and then a physical record emerged from it, like 1920, and ever since that, I felt like I had arrived at a place where things could happen, like an idea could actually make it to the end stage. Mm-hmm. Whereas as a kid, I always felt like I'm halfway through, I have to stop everything.
Whoa, that's super interesting. I almost think I had the inverse experience. When I, started getting jobs as an older person, say as an adult, I always felt so junior compared to, I don't know why, but I mean, I was young, but compared to people that I was working alongside. And it felt like the worst thing I could do in that setting was be anything remotely childlike and or childish. And for some reason, that was not okay for me. And that was when I started forming the language around this kind of distance that I felt that started to emerge between ideas of what it means to be a child and what it means to be an adult, feeling very much like, why? Why is that distance? Like, there are the obvious distances, right? But I wanted to be more specific, and why I felt like I had to perform adulthood now, even though I was very much of that age. And a lot of the work came out of a conversation with my mom, which she probably doesn't even realize, of her being like, you should feel grown up now. And that just having such a clash in my brain, like total tsunami, being like, what does that even mean? And like, what am I growing up into? And by being an adult in whatever space, what systems am I reproducing? And that immediately takes me to systems of authority and hierarchy. And so I just have been slightly upset for a while because like it doesn't serve a lot of people. And you mean I have to be the shepherd of this space now as the adult, as the authority? I don't want to do it. So, it's just been like that thorn in my side for a long time, because the places where they become like professionalized or formal come with other things that I don't agree with. Mm-hmm. Hopefully that's not too vague, but
I think there's a lot of things people can fill in the blanks with there.
Yeah. So I was working at Penn State up until 2021, and I was just really rattling around in my brain with that, and had started making this work, but it was very much fueled by my experiences with my niece and nephew and my easy nostalgia of my own childhood and like academic texts. And it was like, man, if I'm going to be making this work, like I have to be around children in the way that I so clearly want to be. So I quit working there, and very immediately started angling that, toward jobs that allowed me to be in spaces with children, and it like did everything that I needed. And I think is why I have such a good time with them, because my understanding of authority is not this like top down, I control the space, I control how you are in this space. It's more like we are here together. Uh-huh. And then they produce so much of the knowledge of what's happening in that space, and I'm just responding to it and like making sure they're safe. That's a
awesome.
Very, very long answer, but
no, that's great.
It's like very to the heart of it without being like too explicit.
Yeah.
Always a layer of mystery.
I think the last thing I was curious about was just how are you finding Pittsburgh?
Ooh, I love Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
A lot. I think I'm super lucky to have been able to come here because I moved here during the pandemic in May 2020 to do a residency at Bunker Projects. And I was still working at Penn State at the time remotely. And it is just such a generous place with lots of really awesome people who are just game to do something that's creative. Not every place has that. I've also been very lucky to find like a very cheap apartment to live in and a very affordable studio that's like the nicest studio I've ever worked in, you know, to allow people to come and see the work. In the past, you know, it was like the basement of where I was living, or, you know, a spare bedroom, or, you know, to be fair, like a studio on campus of, you know, where I was working. So I love it. I feel exceptionally fortunate that like this is where I chose and put my effort there. And also there's just so many resources. You know, I mentioned the people, but, you know, let's talk about like all of the art organizations that, you know, continue to support artists and the fun, goofy things that they may want to take on and try. I just think that's so special when it's accessible to people, right? Not a lot of spaces have that. So it makes me, yeah, it's very nice.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Sidney.
Cool.
This has been really fun.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate your questions.
Yeah, thank you.